Hey boys, ready for some Lord of the Rings? In case you forgot, we just finished the scene where the hobbits and Strider came across the trolls, the stone trolls that Bilbo and the dwarves turned into stone way back during the Hobbit. So let's move on from there. The road lay quiet under the long shadows of early evening. There was no sign of any other travelers to be seen. As there was now no other possible course for them to take, they climbed down the bank, and turning left, they went off as fast as they could. Soon a shoulder of the hills cut off the light of the fast westering sun. A cold wind flowed down to meet them from the mountains ahead. They were beginning to look out for a place off the road where they could camp for the night, when they heard the sound that brought sudden fear back into their hearts. The noise of hoofs behind them. They looked back, but they could not see far because of the many windings and rollings of the road. As quickly as they could, they scrambled off the beaten way and up into the deep heather and bilberry brushwood on the slopes above, until they came to a small patch of thick-growing hazels. As they peered out from among the bushes, they could see the road, faint and gray in the failing light, some 30 feet below them. The sound of hooves drew near. They were going fast, with a light clippity-clip, clippity-clip. Then, faintly, as if it was blown away from them by the breeze, they seemed to catch a dim ringing, as of small bells tinkling. A dim ringing, as of small bells tinkling. "That does not sound like a black rider's horse," said Frodo, listening intently. The other hobbits agreed hopefully that it did not, but they all remained full of suspicion. They had been in fear of pursuit for so long that any sound from behind seemed ominous and unfriendly. But Strider was now leaning forward, stooped to the ground, with a hand to his ear, a look of joy on his face. The light faded, and the leaves on the bushes rustled softly. Clearer and clearer now the bells jingled, and clippity-clip came the quick trotting feet. Suddenly into view below came a white horse, gleaming in the shadows, running swiftly. In the dusk, its headstall flickered and flashed, as if it were studded with gems like living stars. The rider's cloak streamed behind him, and his hood was thrown back. His golden hair flowed shimmering in the wind of his speed. To Frodo it appeared that a white light was shining through the form and raiment of the rider, as if through a thin veil. Strider sprang from hiding and dashed down toward the road, leaping with a cry through the heather. But even before he had moved or called, the rider had reined in his horse and halted, looking up toward the thicket where they stood. And when he saw Strider, he dismounted and ran to meet him, calling out, "Ai navadui dunadin, magovamin." His speech and clear ringing voice left no doubt in their hearts. The rider was of the elven folk. No others that dwelt in the wide world had voices so fair to hear. There seemed to be a note of haste or fear in his call, and they saw he was now speaking quickly and urgently to Strider. Soon Strider beckoned to them, and the hobbits left the bushes and hurried down the road. "This is Glorfindel, who dwells in the house of Elrond," said Strider. "Hail, and well met at last," said the elf lord to Frodo. "I was sent from Rivendell to look for you. We fear that you are in danger upon the road." "Then Gandalf has reached Rivendell?" cried Frodo joyfully. "No, he had not when I departed, but that was 9 days ago," answered Glorfindel. "Elrond received news that troubled him. Some of my kindred, journeying in your land beyond the Baranduin, learned that things were amiss, and sent messages as swiftly as they could. They said the Nine were abroad, and that you were astray, bearing a great burden without guidance, for Gandalf had not returned. There are few even in Rivendell that can ride openly against the Nine, but such as there were, Elrond sent out north, west, and south. It was thought that you might turn far aside to avoid pursuit, become lost in the wilderness. It was my lot to take the road, and I came to the bridge of Mithaithel, and left a token there, nigh on 7 days ago. 3 of the servants of Sauron were upon the bridge, but they withdrew, and I pursued them westward. I came upon 2 others, but they turned away southward. Since then I have searched for your trail. 2 days ago I found it, and followed it over the bridge, and today I marked where you descended from the hills again. But come, there is no time for further news. Since you are here, we must risk the peril of the road and go. There are 5 behind us." And when they find your trail upon the road, they will ride after us like the wind. And they are not all. Where the other 4 may be, I do not know. I fear that we may find the fort is already held against us." While Glorfindel was speaking, the shades of evening deepened. Frodo felt a great weariness come over him. Ever since the sun began to sink, the mist before his eyes had darkened, and he felt that a shadow was coming between him and the faces of his friends. Now, pain assailed him. He felt cold. He swayed, clutching at Sam's arm. "My master is sick and wounded," said Sam angrily. "He can't go on riding after nightfall. He needs rest." Glorfindel caught Frodo as he sank to the ground, and taking him gently in his arms, he looked in his face with grave anxiety. Briefly, Strider told of the attack on their camp under Weathertop and of the deadly knife. He drew out the hilt, which he had kept, and handed it to the elf. Glorfindel shuddered as he took it, but he looked intently at it. "There are evil things written on this hilt," he said, "though maybe your eyes cannot see them. Keep it, Aragorn, till we reach the house of Elrond. But we must be wary, and handle it as little as you may. Alas, the wounds of this weapon are beyond my skill to heal. I will do what I can, but all the more I do urge you now to go on without rest." He searched the wound on Frodo's shoulder with his fingers, and his face grew graver, as if what he had learned disquieted him. But Frodo felt the chill lessen in his side and arm. A little warmth crept down from his shoulder to his hand. The pain grew easier. The dusk of evening seemed to grow lighter about him, as if a cloud had been withdrawn. He saw his friends' faces more clearly again, and a measure of new hope and strength returned. "You shall ride my horse," said Glorfindel. "I will shorten the stirrups up to the saddle skirts, and you must sit as tight as you can. But you need not fear. My horse will not let any rider fall that I command him to bear. His pace is light and smooth, and if danger presses too near, he will bear you away with a speed that even the black steeds of the enemy cannot rival." "No, he will not," said Frodo. "I shall not ride him. If I am to be carried off to Rivendell or anywhere else, maybe my friends behind in danger." Glorfindel smiled. "I doubt very much," he said, "if your friends would be in danger if you were not with them. The pursuit would follow you and leave us in peace, I think. It is you, Frodo, and that which you bear, that brings us all peril." To that Frodo had no answer, and he was persuaded to mount Glorfindel's white horse. The pony was laden instead with a great part of the other's burdens, so that they now marched lighter, and for a time made good speed. But the hobbits began to find it hard to keep up with the swift, tireless speed of the elf. On he led them into the mouth of darkness, and still on under the deep, clouded night. There was neither star nor moon. Not until the gray of dawn did he allow them to halt. Pippin, Merry, and Sam were by that time nearly asleep on their stumbling legs, and even Strider seemed by the sag of his shoulders to be weary. Frodo sat upon his horse in a dark dream. They cast themselves down in the heather a few yards from the roadside, fell asleep immediately. They seemed hardly to have closed their eyes when Glorfindel, who had set himself to watch while they slept, awoke them again. The sun had now climbed far into the morning, and the clouds and mists of the night were gone. "Drink this," said Glorfindel to them, pouring for each in turn a little liquor from his silver-studded flask of leather. It was as clear as spring water and had no taste, and it did not feel either cool or warm in the mouth, but the strength and vigor seemed to flow into all their limbs as they drank it. Eaten after that draught, the stale bread and dried fruit, which was now all they had left, seemed to satisfy their hunger better than many a good breakfast in the Shire had done. They had rested rather less than 5 hours when they took to the road again. Glorfindel still urged them on, and only allowed 2 brief halts during the day's march. In this way they covered almost 20 miles before nightfall, and came to a point where the road bent right and ran down toward the bottom of the valley, now making straight for the Brunnen. So far there had been no sign or sound of pursuit that the hobbits could see or hear, but often Glorfindel would halt and listen for a moment, if they lagged behind, and a look of anxiety clouded his face. Once or twice he spoke to Strider in the elf tongue. But, however anxious their guides might be, it was plain that the hobbits could go no further that night, They were stumbling along, dizzy with weariness, and unable to think of anything but their feet and legs. Frodo's pain had redoubled, and during the day things about him faded to shadows of ghostly gray. He almost welcomed the coming of night, for then the world seemed less pale and empty. The hobbits were still weary when they set out again early the next morning. There were many miles yet to go between them and the ford, and they hobbled forward at the best pace they could manage. "Our peril will be greatest just before we reach the river," said Glorfindel, "for my heart warns me that the pursuit is now swift behind us, and other danger may be waiting at the ford." The road was still running steadily downhill, and there was snow, and there was now in places much grass at either side, in which the hobbits walked when they could to ease their tired feet. In the late afternoon they came to a place where the road went suddenly under the dark shadow of tall pine trees, and then plunged into a deep cutting with steep, moist walls of red stone. Echoes ran along as they hurried forward, and there seemed to be a sound of many footfalls following their own. All at once, as if through a gate of light, the road ran out from the end of the tunnel into the open. There at the bottom of a sharp incline they saw before them a long, flat mile, and beyond that the ford of Rivendell. On the further side was a steep brown bank, threaded by a winding path, and behind that the tall mountains climbed shoulder above shoulder and peak beyond peak to the falling sky. Fading sky. There was still an echo as of following feet in the cutting behind them, a rushing noise as if a wind were rising and pouring through the branches of the pines. One moment Glorfindel turned and listened, then he sprang forward with a loud cry. "Fly!" he called. "Fly! The enemy is upon us!" The white horse leaped forward. The hobbits ran down the slope. Glorfindel and Strider followed as rear guard. They were only halfway across the flat when suddenly there was a noise of horses galloping. Out of the gate in the trees they had just left rode a black rider. He reined in his horse and halted, swaying in his saddle. Another followed him, and then another, then again 2 more. "Ride forward! Ride!" cried Glorfindel to Frodo. He did not obey at once, for a strange reluctance seized him. Checking the horse to a walk, he turned and looked back. The riders seemed to sit upon their great steeds like threatening statues upon a hill, dark and solid, while all the woods and land about them receded as if into a mist. Suddenly he knew in his heart that they were silently commanding him to wait. Then at once fear and hatred awoke in him. His hand left the bridle and gripped the hilt of his sword, and with a red flash he drew it. "Ride on!" cried Glorfindel, and then loud and clear he called to the horse in the elf tongue, "Nololim! Nololim! Asfaloth!" At once the white horse sprang away and sped like the wind along the last lap of the road. At the same moment the black horses leaped down the hill in pursuit, and from the riders came a terrible cry, such as Frodo had heard filling the woods with horror in the East Farthing far away. It was answered, and to the dismay of Frodo and his friends, out from the trees and rocks away on the left 4 other riders came flying. 2 rode towards Frodo, 2 galloped madly toward the ford to cut off his escape. They seemed to him to run like the wind and to grow swiftly larger and darker as their courses converged with his. Frodo looked back for a moment over his shoulder. He could no longer see his friends. The riders behind were falling back. Even their great steeds were no match in speed for the white elf horse of Glorfindel. He looked forward again and hope faded. There seemed no chance of reaching the ford before he was cut off by the others that had lain in ambush. He could see them clearly now. They appeared to have cast aside their hoods and black cloaks, and they were robed in white and gray. Swords were naked in their pale hands. Helms were on their heads. Their cold eyes glittered. They called to him with terrible voices. Fear now filled all of Frodo's mind. He thought no longer of his sword. No cry came from him. He shut his eyes and clung to the horse's mane. The wind whistled in his ears, and the bells upon the harness rang wild and shrill. A breath of deadly cold pierced him like a spear. and with the last spurt, like a flash of white fire, the elf horse, speeding as if on wings, passed right before the face of the foremost rider. Frodo heard the splash of water. It foamed about his feet. He felt the quick heave and surge as the horse left the river and struggled up the stony path. He was climbing the steep bank. He was across the ford. But the riders were close behind. At the top of the bank, the horse halted and turned about, neighing fiercely. There were 9 riders at the water's edge below, and Frodo's spirit quailed before the threat of their uplifted faces. He knew of nothing that would prevent them from crossing as easily as he had done, and he felt that it was useless to try to escape over the long, uncertain path from the ford to the edge of Rivendell, if once the riders crossed. In any case, he felt that he was commanded urgently to halt. Hatred again stirred in him, but he no longer had the strength to refuse. Suddenly, the foremost rider spurred his horse forward. It checked at the water and reared up. With a great effort, Frodo sat upright and brandished his sword. "Go back!" he cried. "Go back to the land of Mordor, and follow me no more!" His voice sounded thin and shrill in his own ears. The riders halted, but Frodo had not the power of Bombadil. His enemies laughed at him with a harsh and chilling laughter. Come back, they called. To Mordor we will take you." "Go back," Frodo whispered. The ring! They cried with deadly voices, and immediately their leader urged his horse forward into the water, followed closely by 2 others. "By Elbereth and Luthien the Fair," said Frodo with a last effort, lifting up his sword. "You shall have neither the ring nor me." Then the leader, who was now half across the ford, stood up, menacing in his stirrups, and raised up his hands. Frodo was stricken dumb. He felt his tongue cleave to his mouth, his heart laboring, his sword broke and fell out of his shaking hand. The elf horse reared and snorted. The foremost of the black horses had almost set foot upon the shore. At that moment there came a roaring and a rushing, a noise of loud waters rolling many stones. Dimly, Frodo saw the river below him rise, and down along its course there came a plumed cavalry of waves. White flames seemed to Frodo to flicker on their crests, and he half fancied that he saw amid the water white riders upon white horses with frothing manes. The 3 riders that were still in the middle of the ford were overwhelmed. They disappeared, buried suddenly under angry foam. Those that were behind drew back in dismay. With his last failing senses, Frodo heard cries, and it seemed to him that he saw, beyond the riders that hesitated on the shore, a shining figure of white light, and behind it ran a small, shadowy form with waving flames that flared red in the gray mist falling over the world. The black horses were filled with madness, and leaping forward in terror, they bore their riders into the rushing flood. Their piercing cries were drowned in the roaring of the river as it carried them away. Then Frodo felt himself falling, and the roaring and confusion seemed to rise and engulf him together with his enemies. He heard and saw no more. That's the end of the chapter. Love you, boys.